Good evening, folks, and welcome to the horror. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this week we are ranking the Hammer Frankenstein series, starring the late, great Peter Cushing in the role of the Baron Frankenstein. Yes, a great franchise from the legendary Hammer films. Now we are ranking them from the worst to the best, and with that being said, I don't hate any movies in this series. It just ranges from, say, okay to phenomenal, so let's put it that way. Okay, in at last place is The Evil of Frankenstein, which, there's some things I like about this film, but this is when Hammer was actually working together with Universal Pictures. So that's why this film feels a lot like a Universal Frankenstein movie as opposed to a Hammer Frankenstein film. Especially in the resurrection scene, it feels very, very Universal. And it sticks to kind of the basic story of the original Frankenstein. And Peter Cushing is great once again. I love his line when he's like, "Why do they have to ruin everything?" That's a great line. And the monster in this film has makeup similar to Boris Karloff, And I find the monster to not be as interesting in this film. He's not quite as, as layered. Whereas the original Frankenstein film, the monster was kind of like a fish out of water, and he kind of learned from his mistakes as he went, He was trying to just learn as he went, but this monster is just kind of a hulking beast, unstoppable. One thing I thought was funny is they find the monster trapped in ice, very similar to Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. And next one, people probably be shocked by this one, but yes, it's The Revenge of Frankenstein. Now, there are a lot of things I like about this film. I think the story is really good. It's definitely a natural progression of the character of Dr. Baron Frankenstein. And, we see Peter Cushing, we see the film picks up right where the Curse of Frankenstein left off. We see how he escaped the guillotine at the end there, and how he's continuing his experiments. His plan is to transplant the brain of his assistant into the body of a normal, good-looking guy, no hideous monster made up of dead body parts. This is just a normal dude, So that's what I found interesting about. The problem is the pacing is extremely slow. And I find myself falling asleep every single time I try to watch it, I always get like halfway through it and I have to just try and watch it multiple times before I can actually get through it. So that's the problem with this one. I like the story, and I like how, everything seems to be a success. The guy is normal with a smart brain, but the problem is, he deteriorates over time, and he develops murderous tendencies, and, by the end of the film, he is like a monster, his face contorts, and he gets all, yeah. But, yeah, it's a great story, just the execution is not quite there. Next up is definitely a controversial one, and that is The Horror of Frankenstein. Now, they actually replaced Peter Cushing in this film. They went for a young Frankenstein story starring Ralph Bates in the role of Victor Frankenstein. And I actually really enjoy this film. You can never replace Peter Cushing as the Baron, but I think Ralph Bates does a great job, actually. And I like seeing, of course, David Prowse as the monster, Darth Vader himself. And this is probably the most brutal monster in the history of the Frankenstein series. He's like an axe-wielding slasher killer, It's pretty insane. And of course, you got the beautiful Kate O'Mara and Veronica Carlson. That doesn't hurt either, you know. Definitely has a lighter tone. There's more comedy in this film. It's certainly not a comedy, but there's definitely more humor in this film, and I enjoy it, you know. Next up, we have Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. And this was the final film in the Hammer Frankenstein series, and I really enjoy it. I think it's a fitting end for the franchise. Now, they actually could have continued this if they wanted to, the way the film ends, but, you know, I'm glad this was the last one, because, you know, Peter Cushing was definitely getting older, you know. But I enjoy the film. I know the prosthetic makeup effects on the monster look kind of ridiculous. You know, he's like this big, hulking, hairy beast ape man, you know, but he's like bald on top. It's kind of funny. And anytime the monster tries to talk, you can't see his lips move, so you can tell it's like a mask that he's wearing. But that being said, Peter Cushing is absolutely brilliant in this movie. He's amazing. And he is actually a little bit more sympathetic in this film. I like the setting at the insane asylum, you know. It's crazy. I love it. It's great character work. You know, you got Madeline Smith in there. Yeah, it's a really fitting end of the franchise. I really enjoy it. I like how, you know, he tried to take the brain of this brilliant man, this brilliant scientist, and put it in this hulking monster so he could be strong and smart at the same time. And it seems to work at first, but yeah, as it always does, you know, things fall apart and the monster, you know, does not take to the brain, and he kind of loses it. And he goes on a rampage. Another thing I find interesting about the film is there's a little bit of the Beauty and the Beast aspect with the monster and Madeline Smith's character, who's a mute in the film. So I thought that was interesting. Next up is Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. Absolutely love that title, and this is one of my all-time favorite Peter Cushing performances, I must say, because he's such a bastard in this movie. He has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. This is just Victor Frankenstein, 100% evil, you know. He will stop at nothing to further his experiments along. Yeah, what an awesome performance by Peter Cushing. There was a very controversial scene in the film where he does actually, you know, rape Veronica Carlson's character. And some people are put off by that and think that was out of character from... I don't know if that's out of character for this version of Victor Frankenstein so much. But yeah, I love his performance, and I love how he blackmails this young couple, including Veronica Carlson, who is just gorgeous in this movie. But yeah, the plot is kind of similar to the Revenge of Frankenstein in a way, where he takes a smart brain and put it in kind of a more normal guy's body, you know, so it's kind of a brain transplant thing once again. So it doesn't progress so much when it comes to that. It's just Peter Cushing doing his thing. He's great, you know. Next up is what I feel the most creative film in the Hammer Frankenstein series, and that is Frankenstein, Created Woman. Yes, very interesting, flipping the genres of the story, where the monster is actually a beautiful woman. Not only that, is they play with the idea of the Frankenstein being able to transfer his soul into another body. And that's ultimately what happens in the film, is once the character, played by Susan Denberg, dies, she kind of kills herself. Dr. Frankenstein transfers the soul of her boyfriend, who was killed by the guillotine, sentenced to death, and transfers his soul into her body, and he also makes her just beautiful, whereas before she was kind of, she had this nasty scar on her face, and she had a bum leg, but now she's just this absolutely beautiful woman. And this is also almost like a slasher movie, too, where she goes around with a hatchet, you know, hacking dudes up, you know. Of course, luring these men in with her great looks and then just hacking them up, you know, in true slasher fashion. Yeah, really enjoy this film. And once again, this version of Peter Cushing's Frankenstein is a little bit more sympathetic. He's not quite as evil, you know. He actually comes to care for her character, you know. Yeah. And in that number one, was there ever any doubt whatsoever? Obviously, it is The Curse of Frankenstein, released in 1957, which is absolutely phenomenal. And I don't know, this could be my favorite version of the Frankenstein story. I'm not sure. It's definitely up there with the Universal Monsters version, but yeah. Can't say enough about Peter Cushing's brilliant performance. I love the arc of, you know, how we see him from a little kid and learning science. He has this guy, Paul, tutor him in science, and then they get together and they try all these different experiments, and everything seems to be working, and they're making huge breakthroughs, and, you know, they actually are able to revive a dog from the dead, and, you know, you gotta make the natural progression to the next step, and that is human beings. And when that happens, you know, Paul's not too happy. And that's another thing I like about this film, is the dynamic and the relationship between Frankenstein and his assistant, Paul. It very much reminds me of the relationship between Dan and Herbert West in the Reanimator series. So I think this film had a lot of influence on the Reanimator series, which I absolutely love. And, yeah, you got Christopher Lee as the monster here, so definitely a different role for Christopher Lee. He is silent, but, you know, he's able to put such gravitas into the role of the monster. There is definitely depth there, you know. He is like a fish out of water, similar to the Universal Frankenstein series. Only he's maybe a little bit more brutal, maybe a little bit more of a monster. Not quite as sympathetic, but there is something there, you know, there's depth to the character, because Christopher Lee is obviously such a phenomenal actor, and that comes through. Also, that grotesque makeup that he wears, so Hammer did such a great job on the makeup, absolutely horrific. Phenomenal performance by Peter Cushing, Hazel Court, and obviously Christopher Lee. I can't say enough about it. This is the film that put Hammer on the map in the world of horror, you know. Beautiful color, beautiful set design that Hammer is so well known for. Just gorgeous to look at. The set designs are like beautiful paintings almost, you know. It's just a brilliant film. It's an absolute horror classic, and one of the greatest Hammer films of all time. That's it, guys. Thank you for joining me for ranking the Hammer Frankenstein series, and thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared. Good evening, folks, and we got some brand new merchandise for you over at www.thehorrorcona.com, and that's CONA.com. Representing the Horror Corner. Great new design. We got the Morbid Hour live stream there, you got the Horror Hangout live stream there, and you got my nemesis, the Dark Fate. So grab your t-shirt over at www.thehorrorcona.com. And we also got this beautiful new mug. Look at that. Very, very cool. Thought that came out really nice. So grab your merchandise today over at www.thehorrorcona.com. Folks, don't forget to grab your Sean Patrick Erschen gear and represent the Horror Corner. Also, check out these awesome mugs we have. Perfect for your coffee. And definitely check out the Horror Hangout live stream t-shirt and represent the legacy of the Horror Hangout. Check out the link in the description below this video.